Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Design in Dialogue. I am so pleased to have April Greiman joining us from Los Angeles today. Please, before we start, just a few housekeeping announcements. First of all, if you have questions for us, or if you just like to let us know where you're zooming in from, please put that in the chat box. And we'll, of course, get back to your questions at the end. Also, we have muted you all to maintain audio quality. And if you'd like to let others know about the program after the fact, of course, we archive it and it will be available on Friedman Benda's website. So that brings us to the main event. April, hello. You're zooming in from Los Angeles. The haze that we're seeing there is actually not, I'm glad to say, wildfire haze.
Well, it might be a little bit, you know.
But I gather there was a nail polish issue.
No, it was a nail glue issue. That's a different, it's a different product, but you know, we'll tell you about that later.
Okay, well, it's giving you a kind of good old Hollywood.
One side doesn't have the glue, so I can always, you know, whatever.
It's actually kind of madly appropriate because one of the things we're going to be talking about is your use of space. And it seems to me like you use space like painters use paint, you know, it's a medium for you. And we're also going to be talking a lot about technology. Before we plunge into images, I just wanted to ask you if you wanted to say anything in general about the role of technology in your work and the role that it's had.
Oh, Peter Zweig is on here. What can I say? Yeah, I guess one thing that, again, maybe even you're putting together the predominant amount of this presentation, Glenn, reminded me, and a good reminder that there have been kind of two main themes running through, or two main aspects of my work that pull through, whether it's graphic design or environmental work or art or photography and color work, is that I've always been really interested in kind of exploring technology and predominantly out of fear, you know, like seeing a new tool and then thinking, you know, I'm going to die because I don't know how to use this, so I'll kind of tackle it. And the other thing is space. And so those things are always kind of pulling through, I think, some of the more important works and projects. So yeah, like I always say, like the moth to the flame, if there's a new technology, then I gotta conquer it or I know I'll die. You know, it's kind of stupid, but I do freak out and think, I mean, even if like when I worked with the electronic paint boxes, which preceded my working with the Macintosh and with well, they are computers, paint boxes, but while I could never afford the time really, or I didn't have the deep enough interest to spend a year learning how to just use the software, that would be every day for a year. And they were the paint boxes are based on video quality and video feed. So, but I did learn enough about them to work with an operator, and then it became a dear friend, Bob Inkelsiep, and such that when the Mac and other more primitive tools arrived, then I was pretty kind of conversant in how to think about them and how to use them. So that's.
Well, that seems like a good segue actually into our first few images. And in fact, we're going to start with an image that is not designed on a computer, although it kind of looks like it is to me, but it's technological in a different sense because it's 3D. So this is something you would actually view through 3D glasses and it would appear to have spatial depth. Of course, you made a lot of work earlier than this as well, but we're just picking up the story in 1983. Can you say a little bit about what your interest was in using that particular technology, which people might associate with, 3D films or things like that?
Well, it was based on the content and the client. I had to put together an announcement, a poster for an event where something like, I don't know, there's like 40, I can't count them, but let's say about 40 of the showrooms at the Pacific Design Center, all who had product, textiles, furniture, lighting. And so, for me, everything was an object in space. And so, rather than, slavishly, argue with people of what size their perhaps ugly chair had to be represented, or their, textile, it just was too daunting to try to literally try to put these objects in space. So, but I definitely want to use space and to place their names in there. And so I just thought, wow, maybe this could be 3D. And in fact, I do have over on the left, there's my hands holding up a piece of something, fabric or a building material. I don't know what it was. And then I just floated kind of more abstracted objects that represented the different kinds of, there's a little line drawing of a chair. I don't know if you can see that below the one, above the, so, and then I can't remember really at all how I did this, like who I contacted, but and then we made custom glasses, and then this shipped out in a tube. It's a really nice package, and then
So was there already a thought there, April, at this stage in your career, that something like a poster commission could be much more than that? That it could be an art event, it could be something that would survive long after the occasion that prompted the design and become, a sort of part of your oeuvre in a broader sense? Were you thinking in that way already at that stage?
I tend to not project very much. I'm just kind of like dogged to the task and trying to come up with a concept that works, but that goes beyond beyond the expectation of and I was fascinated really since I went to grad school. I never thought of things as pages or two-dimensional. I always saw everything as a spatial medium, and it has always been, in my mind, to think about spatial and information hierarchy. And so, if really, there's so many examples, including business cards that look like space,
Yeah.
and that's just achieved not through something as literal as this, but the size of using different sizes of typography or using different color that gives you a spatial quality.
That was sort of why I thought it would be interesting to start with this one, because it's so explicit as a kind of breaking open the relationship between 2D and 3D. Before we leave this first image, April, I did want to ask you one other thing. You just mentioned your graduate school experience, and I think it might be helpful, partly for people who don't know the kind of trajectories of late 20th century graphic design, to just say a little bit about how the story of Swiss design fits into your biography, and I think particularly of Wolfgang Weingart as a figure to mention. So could you just say a little bit about what Swiss graphics and typography is about, and sort of how you responded to your experiences of it?
Sure. So, well, first of all, in my undergraduate education in the US, in Kansas City Art Institute, I had 3 teachers from the Basel School that were European, that actually went through the full, regular program of a Swiss education. Although one was Russian, one was Swiss, and one was German, but they had all gone to the Kunstgewerbeschule Basel. And so I had that basic training, which was very basic. And in fact, we didn't have a type shop in Kansas City. So I was really anxious about typography because we're using letraset, or rub down letters for typography. And so one of the main reasons I decided to continue on and go to the Weiterbildungsklasse in Basel was to study typography. And so, I mean, as much as I was influenced, of course, by Weingart, and I'll talk about that in 2 seconds, but I was the profound influence of Armin Hoffman. And in a way, probably what I learned, well, I learned the same thing from both of them in such extremely different ways, which was to kind of address a discipline. And with Hoffman, it was like what I call, my first experience with Zen, because for the whole year that I was there in Basel, the first year that I worked on assignments in his class. I can't remember if I think we met a couple times a week. I can't remember. They were all day classes. No music, no toys, no games, no nothing. Just these assignments, which were very, very, very basic and profoundly so. And in that year, he never spoke to me once.
Oh.
And he would, surely he would be there for 6-8 hours. And he would just, he would go desk by desk. And every time he came near my desk, I thought he would say something, and he never did. And he never, ever said anything to me while I was a student. So I call that my first experience with Zen. However, the learning curve for me was pretty amazing, and has made it really, without sounding trite, it made me kind of understand what it means to just keep looking, and learning how to see, and, to be so kind of single-minded on your exploration. And by contrast, Weingart was like, he was like a kid. He was just so playful and always joking, and always, it wasn't like it was noisy or, lots of laughter, but it was very open. Now, admittedly, Weingart was closer in age to us, the students, than obviously Hoffman, but Hoffman just turned 100 in this year in June, and he's still alert. But so with Weingart, people always say, I kind of reacted or against the Basel school, or it was, yeah, I mean, some people, when I moved to California, said it was the Swiss school on acid, or, or they called it me, the Basel Dazzle. And, but I think the thing with Weingart that I value so much was that he would give an assignment, and then you worked in the type shop, and you had your own type case, and that ran, oh my God, it must have been 15 feet long, maybe more. It was like the full length of the room, the tape shop. And every student had that whole thing. And in that were cases and cases of metal type. And so because of my extreme fear of not knowing about typography, and definitely not understanding it materially, which of course gives you, the great gift of learning a new art. Like if you handle material and you compose material, like I learned to handset typography with individual letters, metal letter forms, and then to tie them up. Sadly, I learned everything in German, so I don't even know the right words, but you would schnur them up, and that means like with a string or something. And then, you put it on I learned how to use a press and do print letter press, and we had to print our own things. So, and, how to ink a press and how to make a plate. And if you wanted something that was beyond like an image, then you couldn't, it wasn't done with pure typography. But the value was that Weingart would give us an assignment, and he encouraged us to, use the full length of our desks or our job cases, 20 feet long or something. And so you would work on maybe 10, 12 variations on the same assignment. And the good thing about that is it's more a little bit closer to how your mind works, where you get an idea and you start something, and then another idea enters in. So you can so you do some roughs, you print up some samples, you can cut it apart once you've printed it, and then you start doing the layout part of it, composition, or the design of it. And so, it it kept your mind fresh, and you could get another idea, and you'd have your type already printed out. So then you cut it and do a different composition, and then another one, another one. Then sometimes you would go back to the second one, and
Mm.
because you realized you were still in the same area, but it was a little bit more evolved as a, as a hierarchy or as a communication. So
So
um,
let me because we have so much
along.
to cover. I wanted to sort of leap ahead to this big break that occurred,
Okay.
and one of the
No
things
more
that
questions then.
yes, that you're so well known for is using the Mac
Right.
very early, perhaps the earliest person using it in graphics. And also in that first moment when you were using the Mac, you were also using it in a highly inventive way that, again, use these kind of three-dimensional techniques, which perhaps you can explain a little bit as to how you would arrive at an image like this. So can you talk a little bit about being such an early adopter of digital technology and then how you approached it at that time?
I think you better not ask me any other questions because we're on slide 2, and
Exactly. That's the give me quick,
gave you
yeah.
a 20-minute answer on that first one. Okay, well, this is an exhibition at the Fortuny Museum, and Pacific Wave was the curator and graphic designer for the Fortuny Museum in Venice. Invited, I can't remember, there like maybe a dozen of us from California to be in an exhibition, and somehow I did this poster. It's a very simple idea. Um, uh, is like there's a little black rectangle kind of in the center, just below center on the right there.
Mhm.
And well, let me say, I started with a photograph of a wave. Duh. And um, and I thought that was kind of nice too, because people think of California and surfing and so forth, California dreaming. So from there, I digitized that. And see, this was 86. So this is pretty early because, well, I don't know if we had a color Mac by 87, by 86, because I think we did it the year before. But anyway, so I then selected a group of pixels in that wave. And then I just, like powers of 10, sorry, Eames, but I just kept enlarging it to reveal kind of the architecture of computer and digital language.
Mm.
And so you see it, where the black rectangle is with the blobs look like snowballs as it gets bigger, is that exact area that I've zoomed in, selected those, enlarged that, and then I just continued to do,
Mm.
2 more enlargements.
So you're
Um,
really digging into the materiality of the digital substance in some sense there.
Kind of, yeah, revealing what I call the texture of technology.
Yeah. And then the other thing, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that these letter forms that kind of coast across the image,
Mhm.
which look impossible to make at a Mac of that era, what you did was actually print them on some kind of clear material like an acetate and then rephotograph it. Is that right?
I don't recall, but it is still the kind of pre-postscript typography,
Right.
because it is kind of bitmapped kind of type. So I maybe I might have done that, Glenn. I just don't remember, because right about then there were, yeah, I guess Photoshop didn't come in till maybe 89, something like that.
Yeah.
I
What,
can't remember.
what's
So
so interesting to me though about this whole patch of material, and I'll show another one here, the modern poster from MoMA. This is 1988. Is just the way that your training as a hands-on designer was intersecting with this new digital world and
well,
producing
this was done with the electronic paint box. So,
Mhm.
and the concept, just briefly on this, is that it was one of the official it was the official poster for the modern poster exhibition.
Mhm.
And my contention was that TV and video was the new poster, um, and so it actually was
Mhm.
before. in the early 80s, when I was the director of design program at CalArts, I learned how to shoot video and had my own professional video equipment. So a lot of things you'll see in that work in that period brought video technology to even make the computer graphics messier and lower res and hateful for the part of many established New York male designers. And so, but this was composed, but there are several, I think there were several pieces that were done with the Mac, including, I used a lot of Emigre's early fonts too. So this would be the bitmap version of Modula, I think, that says modern poster in the spiral.
Right.
Okay, so.
And let's talk about this super important and very well known project from '86.
Taking this in my studio.
Yeah, exactly. So we see it also gives a sense of the scale, because my understanding is this is almost body size or like life sized, right?
Oh, it is. It's let's see. At that time, I think I was 5'3.5". I'm not sure. So this was about I don't know it was pretty much just a few inches taller than me or longer than me. What would you like me to talk about here?
Well, there's so much we could spend an hour on this at least, but I guess one of the first things I wanted to ask you was about the projection of a kind of feminist sensibility, and whether that's a term that you would accept as a interpretation of this image, and then how you thought about the kind of
it's not exactly that. I mean, for me, it was, I entered the California scene with a bit of a splash and bit of notoriety. And then as soon as my work became a little bit well-known, famous, then I got a lot of, what do you call it, pushback. That I was not a designer, I was an artist. And there was this constant, like, let's beat on Greiman because there's something new happening here, both with typography, like busting out of international style, and use of color, use of space, use of new materials. So when I got invited to do Design Quarterly, which is a magazine or journal that, folds down and is can go on a bookcase or magazine rack. I just this was really about saying, what's personal, what's commercial, what's your own agenda, what's your authorship versus a brief from a client. And so I just thought the perfect visual metaphor would be to use my own body as representative of, personal versus, applied or, commercial. And so it really wasn't so much about feminism, but since I was handy and could easily be shot with video. And it also, again, gave me an excuse to use, I mean, this was like not even 2 years into having, a Mac. So this was not the first Mac, not 128. This would have been 512, something like that. So a little bit bigger than a JPEG. And, but I had professional video equipment. So it's really interesting to bring high end, but the main vehicle and the really profound tool was the Macintosh. So I hooked my video up to my Macintosh, and there was it's called MacVision, I think. It was a little box that you could cable into your video and then cable out to your computer. And I just wanted to explore kind of the body in space as a profound object in space. And
and what about the communicative gestures in the image, April? Because to me, like the 1980s was the moment when semiotics was being taught in every art school, for example, and you're using these images that imply sign language and symbolism. Then you have photography, and of course you have the digitization of the image. So it seems like it's a real kind of like
Well,
sand pit, different semiotic conditions.
yeah, a pencil is a form of technology.
Right.
So, so the body in space and those gestures are, you can see a pencil. Some of them were just kind of, I looked at Italian hand gestures since they were very often, racy and funny and well known. And, there's no super deep meaning there other than, the hand as being, as important a tool and a vehicle for expression as anything else. I got the spray can there. So it just a lot of the early tools or preceding tools are in there that yeah, it's not so literal as to every gesture means something. I mean, uh,
There's
got
also there's also a compression of time too, because you have these prehistoric figures that we see
to.
there on the left, and then you have images of space. So there's also a sense of the kind of grand sweep of human imagining and imaging.
Yeah. Um, there is a little, I don't want to say fascination, but interest of mine in Eastern medicine and Eastern philosophy. And so I was also interested in the chakras, the energy centers of the body. And so the dinosaur and Stonehenge are definitely at the root chakra.
I see. Okay.
And so that is one of the many themes in here. And, to the top chakra, which is the hand holding the glass sphere, the
Mm.
glass bead. And
Huh.
there's like all these, there are a lot of different themes running through these and areas of interest for me. Um,
Let me ask one last question, because that idea of the chakras makes me also think about meditation. And one way to read the image of yourself here is that you're in floating in space in kind of meditative state. And yet there's also a sense that you're on a flatbed
mhm,
and under some kind of analysis or examination, which is a
mhm,
totally different
okay, mhm,
image. And to me, one of the things that makes it so powerful is that those two things kind of exist side by side, like the interior view and the exterior view, being in touch with yourself and being looked at or objectified, which is maybe why I think of it in a feminist context. Um,
mhm.
and I wonder if you like that reading of the kind of doubleness of inside and outside.
Well, it's also, I'm two-headed because at my feet is my head again.
Right.
Mhm. And so, and there's the phrase, the spiritual double. So it
Mm.
is kind of I'm in repose and I am kind of, uh, well, sleeping in nothingness.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. As it says at the bottom there. Okay. Well, as I said, this is such a rich image. We could spend the whole interview on it, but it's a really, to me, it's one of the most powerful and significant images of the late 20th century. So it's good to have had a few minutes to spend on it. Okay, this is a much bigger object that we're looking at. It's weird on Zoom; you get no sense of scale, but this was actually used as the basis for a billboard, among other applications.
mhm.
And I just
I have the 80-foot billboard in my studio that Milton Friedman decided. She said, "Well, we can't use it. We can't store it. Do you want it?" And I'd forgotten. It was assembled with 14 feet pieces of vinyl, but it was the whole facade of the Walker. And when this thing showed up on a truck, like a flatbed or something, so it is in my studio, and it'll be the last thing still remaining after the big one out here because it's massive. And I mean, there's no way I could ever use it, but yeah. What would you like to talk about? Because
well, if you don't mind, what I wanted to do is, so if people could just remember this image, and then if we could look at this image, which is, of course, from a different moment, it's actually 10 years later. But what I wanted to ask you about here, with slight air of forgiveness, is to ask you to talk about the concept of postmodernism. And in fact, we met when I included you in an exhibition about postmodernism at the V&A.
oh, you do this thing all the time, Glenn.
I do, because I'm interested in it. But, if I just go back to this one for a second, this obviously places a lot of emphasis on the idea of mediation. So there's a sense of being, I don't know, like nose to a TV screen, something like that.
Can
And
I
then,
just explain the concept for that though?
sure, sure, yeah, do
Okay.
that. Yeah.
So just because I think there are some students of mine. So graphic design equals technology,
Mm,
right? So the concept here is, and it's America, and so the American flag is is an obvious symbol or object to represent. But so on the left, you see the small stars, and that represents the first technology in graphic design, which is steel engraving. So that would involve a steel plate. And then the bigger stars are offset lithography, where you see the dot screen from from a printer's what do you call that? Films and screens to print the four color.
like
And
it's,
then the next thing is where the stripes begin is the video technology. And then finally, the very kind of pixelated far right, I have to get all of you off of, is the computer technology. So just so they know the concept. So it's the evolution of graphic design through technological means from left to right is the concept.
yes, exactly. So I guess that's what I meant when I was saying it's an emphasis on mediation and the
Uh-huh,
technology of
uh-huh.
making the image. Um, so I guess, the question that I had was looking back at this period where there was a lot of debate about legibility. There's a lot of debate about the free floating signifier, so called. So this idea of like the spatial field as being playful, which you exemplified. And I feel like a lot of people, in the same way that when you arrived in California, they thought of you as like the psychedelic version of Swiss typography and graphics. By this point in the 80s and into the 90s, I feel like you did come to be a kind of avatar of West Coast postmodernism. And I just wonder how you look back at that period and what you think the priorities were for you and how that might differ from the cartoon version that might be projected against you.
I don't know. Again, this is me being able to work in Photoshop and to start to explore spatializing typography um, and clearly the ability to have lots of layered information,
Mm,
lots of info hierarchy, and also yeah, it does say a sheet of paper isn't merely a whatever, it's just a field or a space that is traversed.
yeah.
So I'm trying to get that personal message that this isn't a page, this is a space,
Mm,
and information and objects exist in space,
mm,
uh, and it's where relationships are established and not just simply communicated.
mm,
So yeah, and I mean this was for an AIGA event, so I had a little bit more freedom to put more kind of personal, thoughtful messages in there.
yeah.
Uh,
Because the sophistication and layering of it also means that to really absorb it fully, you would need to spend a great deal of time and really treat it as an artwork.
kind of, I guess. I just never think that way, Glenn, and the whole modernism and postmodernism and none of that really has, when you say those words, it just doesn't really attach much really meaning to me.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
does. I'm just kind of on my own, search there for the truth.
yeah, yeah. Well, that in a way is maybe what I wanted to get across to the audience and people who might listen to this later on, which is I feel like your practice is indeed very practice based, very process led, and
Correct.
curiosity led. And I think it's just because it's very easy to maybe use you as a stand in for whatever. But to me, the way that the space becomes its own exploratory field, that's the thing that I feel like an image like this really gets across, and it does also in a really uncanny and powerful way anticipate later virtual experience, like the kinds of graphics that are now available to Hollywood filmmakers or are popping up on our phones. And this
Right.
does seem so ahead of its time. So there's something remarkable there that you were able to intuit. Um, Let me now make another big leap. And unfortunately, this is really a placeholder for a big topic in its own right, which is your work as a public artist. And this is one of the better known projects called Hand Holding a Bowl of Rice. Can you talk a little bit about that leap to public art, what made you interested in it, and then what you brought with you when you started working in that field?
Well, I was just fortunate that to date, with the exception of one public art commission, I've always had an art consultant kind of bring me into a project. And so this one in particular was the art consultant was Mary Norris, who sadly passed away last year, right? Or was it this year? Yeah, Mary passed away last year. And she was just such a force for good in Los Angeles and did so many amazing things and was honored at SciArc and so forth. But anyway, so this is a brand new building and a new metro station and a new area of redevelopment in Koreatown at Wilshire, Vermont. And there is a metro station if you walk through the two walls there to the entry and through the plaza. I guess the good thing for the client, who was a developer called Urban Partners, was that I think they had another artist. I think they had Kenny Scharf actually work on this, but somehow it didn't go through, whatever that was. But was that they knew that because of my design skills and abilities, I could be on time and on budget, which was a big plus. And I also was able to present my work and my ideas using like SketchUp and using tools that architects understood or developers understood, so you could actually see things through different viewpoints from in space. The body in space. So, but I would just say that the concept, what I'm proud of here, was that a lot of public art is, the client or the developer hires an artist that they like, and sometimes it's a sculptor or a painter or whatever, and very often the artwork is beautiful and as commissioned, and it's just kind of put into the space. And in my case, I felt like I wanted this to be contextual, that it had to relate to, Koreatown. It had to relate to the physical space and the walls that it was going to be applied to. And so I, for a month, shot video predominantly and still photos of the area day and night, in noodle shops, walking around the corner, from bicycle, from, in every way I could. I shot in the subway, which was already in operation at that station. So the thing that I felt was kind of the most universal as a symbol for the area was like a bowl of rice, and that it's the most obviously consumed grain in the world. And don't ask me to explain this, but apparently the DNA of a grain of rice is more complex than the human species. Yeah, again, don't ask me, but it is based in science.
It is
And
very
so,
much stuff of life, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so I really like the idea. It's very simple, but it was shot in video, and obviously there's no rice, and it was kind of challenging because the walls. The client said I could get rid of the folds in the wall because they weren't enamored with having to do another detail that the architect had spec'd. But the architects are quite famous. It's Architectonica building. And unlike Architectonica other buildings, which are always madly colorful, this was a black and white building, so, or gray and black. But I wanted to honor their building, and they had designed these folds in the walls. So where you see the diagonal stress in those, that's actually a dimensional where they're folding out. And so it was tricky doing an ellipse, a 6-story ellipse on a bowl with, walls that had folds in it and that were,
Yeah.
Anyway.
But
So,
that's part of the point, though, because in making this transition from the 2D work to this work that lives out in space, there's also a very interesting thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is about the way that you've been using space at this point already for years and years as this malleable medium, almost as if space were a material that you were shaping. And suddenly now you're out there in 3D space and people are occupying the space that you're working in. So I was wondering whether that felt like an actualization of something you had virtualized before, or what that leap was like for you going out into 3D.
and going up to 8,200 square feet.
Yeah.
It was challenging, but somehow, I guess, again, because of the software, like using SketchUp, like I could actually apply this to those walls. And I tested different images and on those walls. And, as you walked in the plaza, I mean, virtually walked through there, I could visualize what you'd see. And in fact, if you're right in between the walls on the plaza, there's not the funky ellipse being all bent like you see it here. There is one point where the image is one image, and it's not a distorted bowl. Excuse me. But again, space and scale have also been, tied together for me. And, I think I learned, very basic typographic or information hierarchy with typography of like, just something like a bolder font, the same font but bolder, or the same font but bigger, creates a space. The size change or the scale change makes a difference. It's that subtle and that profound at the same time. So this
Well, on that note, let's move on to your photography work, and then we're now going to look at a lot more images quicker because we have a lot to show. But maybe one of the first things to say about your photography, and we're going to just start with this series called Drive-By Shooting, wonderful title, is just the scale of the photographs, just to give people a sense of that. Because again, these are objects in space. And when you're seeing them just on Zoom here, it really doesn't do them any kind of justice, unfortunately, but I'll give you a sense. So here's an exhibition of the photographs, and then here's you in your studio with some of them on the racks, just to give people a sense of the size of these things that we're going to be looking at. So having said that, can you talk a little bit about your embrace of photography and what that's brought to your career trajectory?
Well, just you don't have to go back to the slide, but in the drive-by shooting, just the concept, I got some pushback on that, particularly in LA. But the idea of that series of photographs, which I ended up calling environments or paintings, because one of them was like 14 feet wide. The smallest is 4 feet wide. And it's just the challenge with when you put together the components of time, movement, and technology, that you capture a moment, and that moment reveals what sometimes your conscious mind doesn't catch, kind of what's going on in that environment. So for example, lots of perceptual things. I mean, our brain puts messages and puts information together, right? First of all, we're seeing upside down, and then our brain changes it so it looks right reading. So, for example, go back one, Glenn.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So just very quick, but like the sand here actually looks like water, and it changes texture, and it reveals all the color that's in the sand, which we think is beige, but in fact, the color of water is in there. And the little thing that's holding up the guardrail on the bottom left is becoming translucent.
Mm.
And so you really see that, everything is in movement, everything is in flux. And we read it as a solid. And yet, this is like just kind of raising your perceptual awareness, and to remind you of what you're conscious of or what you're not conscious of.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Let me show a couple more of them. One of the things I love about this series is precisely that way that it relates to time, because it gives you this feeling that, in fact, the material world is liquid in relation to time, and you're kind of putting us in touch with some sort of underlying entropy, but through this very, very simple device of the speed at which you're traveling when taking the image. And that idea of that kind of fluidity. And this one, I think, is just so emblematic of the whole series, because it's about directionality, and you have the car coming the other way. So it feels like the whole story there.
yeah, and that car, which the more you look at it, looks as foreground as the arrows,
Yeah.
is like about 22 pixels. If you really get up close and you see this, you've seen it in person, Glenn, but I mean, it's just insane. And from here, it looks like it has a lot of detail. And also, the posts that hold up the sign are dissolving. Why is the sign solid and then the posts dissolving? And the whole figure ground, the perception of what's foreground, what's background, and and then the fabric, again, the texture of technology is just awesome. And so that, for me, they're like paintings or weavings.
Yeah, what I also love about them is that your first take might be that it challenges the veracity or the truth-telling capabilities of photography, but then you realize it's much more complicated than that, because what you're doing is taking that indexical truth-telling capability of photography and then the warped manipulation that occurs within the technology and sort of weaving them together, as you said, and making a new synthesis out of those two seeming opposites. Let's look at some more images. This is from another series called Do Not Trust Atoms, which, forgive me for putting it this way, April, but it's sort of based on a bad pun, right? That title, Do Not Trust Atoms, they make up everything.
Exactly.
And
in fact, I did a rug that showed in an exhibition. I was in a group show in London at Auto Italia. I don't know if you'd left England by then, Glenn, but so I had a series of things with avatars, but I did a rug, a huge rug, a floor mat that said, "Do not trust atoms; they make up everything."
Yeah. But this series also is fascinating because, of course, technology is proceeding as you're proceeding. And I feel like in the same way that you're staying a few steps ahead of it in the 1980s and then in the 1990s, you have continued to do that. And I feel like there's still a kind of futuristic quality, if I could use that word, or something like that's hard to grapple with in your mind that's going on even in these quite recent images. Let's show another one here. And then the references to the digital environment that we inhabit as well, these kind of cues.
And all of these involve literally technology and movement.
Maybe just because we're running a little short on time, can we crack right on to the last group, which is called White Space? And this is brand new work, so nobody will have seen it, I don't think. So first, can you explain the title, White Space? It's quite a provocative title at this stage in the game.
Yeah, it's one word.
Yep.
And so it's again, like, drive-by shooting became a little bit of a problem for some people, but white space here is non-political. And I don't want to explain this too much, because when you see the images, you'll have to kind of think about psychological space, not so much color as kind of it's more about atmosphere. It's about questioning space. It's about, I guess, maybe the biggest theme running through about 30 of these images, which I'm hoping to publish in a book, is about the ambiguity of space. On this one particular, I've had a couple publisher friends kind of look at this and say, well, we don't know how we're gonna, get, I don't know what you intend, like we can't like have website that you see the video, but this is not about that. It's about that icon becoming another object in
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
And it's the layering of information of all kinds with all kinds of tools that provide this kind of iconography and layered information.
That's such a simple thing, but it's so complex what you've done there to take this thing that we take for granted that, you know, it immediately cues us to, oh, this image does this, but then to show that it's actually just a graphic object and that it can exist in a different relationship with the image, and that this is something that we're constructing and we're also being conditioned to expect, almost like Pavlov's dog. So it, to me, it's a really powerful critique of the, you know, imagescape that we all inhabit. Just that very simple thing. This one strikes me as being maybe a little more connected to drive-by shooting, some of the interests there, perhaps.
Yeah, but it has ambiguous space, and it also, I call it a kind of a digital settlement.
Yeah, yeah. You say it's not a political project, but I have to say it did remind me a little bit of Robert Frank's project, The Americans, the famous photographic book that he did, because it seems so plugged into where we're at right now. You know, not political in the sense of making an argument, political in the sense of charting a set of conditions, maybe.
Correct.
And this one really comes across to me that way. You know, it's like says Red State America to me, but in a very non-judgmental, observant way. Can you say a little bit about the writings that you've drafted for the project? Because I think that's very interesting too.
Well, I invited about 25 women, architects, artists, curators, museum director, graphic designers, their colleagues or friends of mine, to write a text with the theme of white space. If any of them who have written something, I know at least one person who's written something extremely beautiful is a participant today, and they would have, none of them would have seen any of my images. And the condition was that the piece of writing could not be more than 350 words. It would have nothing to do with my work. It would have nothing to do with my photographs, which they didn't see anyway. And that it would just address a personal take on white space. And I got the most awesome 20 written pieces, just breathtaking. And they could not be more different. And they could not be more just beautiful. You know, everything from a haiku to, you know, 3 sentences to, you know, a full narrative about somebody's grandmother.
So it's kind of like a intellectual, exquisite corpse in a way. That's sort of associative undertaking. Was there a reason that you invited only women to participate?
I'm just trying to, like, you know, do my bit.
Yeah, love it. Well, this is our last image, and it's a beautiful one to end on. It reminds me of like the old Hollywood thing of like riding off into the sunset or something, but it looks also like it could be the back of a Hollywood lot or something. So it's, again, this idea of where are we and the constructedness of the image that's being presented to us.
Completely complex, filled space that's empty.
Yeah, well put. Well put. That's a good slogan. So we just have a few minutes left for questions, but I do want to take a couple. The first is from Vera Sacchetti. Sorry, I'm just going to stop share. If you do have other questions for April, let us know. So the first question from Vera Sacchetti is whether you have ever worked with Ralph Schreivogel.
I haven't, but he's among my heroes of posters and graphic design. I just love him. And he was actually a guest of our formerly owned motel in the desert, Miracle Manor. And I got to spend some time when he and his girlfriend came out and visited. And he's brilliant. And yeah, but I've never worked with him. I mean, he's, you know, if he gets a job, you got to know he's on it, and his work is just, exponentially more beautiful than mine, and more refined.
Well, we have somebody saying essentially the same about you, which is, this is from D. Bruno. Ultimate compliment. I spent my entire career trying to copy you, April. Thanks. It was impossiple. You're one of
What
my
a
friends so far
torture.
at this time. Okay, next question. This is like a tech question. I kind of like these questions.
Can you hold on a second? Donatella, thank you.
That's Donatella. Great. Yeah, so I kind of like these simple tech questions because they often actually bring a lot out, which is, what kind of camera do you use, or maybe cameras?
Oh, I don't use a camera.
See, I'm so glad Sarah asked this. You don't use a camera, you use what, a phone?
Yeah. And I have everything that you see, like the drive-by shooting. Mm-hmm. The largest image, what was that, 2006? That's 14, well, 50, well, some of them were 20 years ago. Well, some, maybe the first ones were with a disposable camera, but for the most part, they were shot with a phone. So when I got those printed by Nash Editions, the largest image size would have been 72 DPI.
Okay, right.
The largest.
Yeah, that maybe prompts a question from me, which is whether at the same time that you have been such an early adopter and so fearless in taking on technologies and not letting them be terra incognita for you, whether you also have a specific interest in low grade kind of accessible pop technology, because there's a kind of
I always prided myself, like when I was at CalArts, I bought professional Sony video equipment. Mm-hmm. And then I started using paint boxes because they handled good quality, high-end entertainment business video. And then I got a Mac, and I found that the better tool, the more profound tool, was the Macintosh. And then I just always prided myself on like using the same kind of stuff my parents would use, like a disposable camera or little, what do you call it, snap and shoot, or point and shoot. That, there's always a tendency like to make everything look like everything else, like make, I like the texture of technology. I like that to be revealed. And I think that texture, is a sensual thing, and it resonates. It makes a different message in the body. And so, just trying to layer sensual and sensorial, I don't know if sensorial is the right word, but sensuality back into design, and things that are sometimes the technology is a vehicle, but still the final expression of it retains information that gives you a sense of objects in space, texture in space.
Okay, we have two last questions. Let's do these quickly because we're almost out of time, April, sorry. So one is from my colleague, Stephen Burks, co-host of the show, who asks if you could say a little bit more about your relation to Emigre. So you mentioned the fonts that Emigre was making, but of course there's the, what he's describing rightly as the cutting edge graphic design magazine that was really influential in the 80s. Did you have a specific working relationship with Emigre?
No, but as soon as they started publishing, I made a pilgrimage up to visit their studio, and I met Susanna and Rudy.
Rudy, yeah, thank you.
It is just 9 o'clock in the morning for me. So I just love their work, and I liked, again, like I like that. I mean, eventually, like Matrix, the font, and Modular, all of these, got upgraded. But I liked them when they first came out, and they were, we were in the same tribe. We were like riding the horse in the direction it was going, instead of trying to make it like a lot of older men in New York criticized me of like the end of typography, or the end of everything, and so I also, one of my early projects was the first professional brand for SCI-Arc, Southern California Institute of Architecture. and I just thought the perfect font was Matrix, and so their whole brand was used with was Matrix, and it obviously conceptually it's pretty great, but just it was such a beautiful font.
Yeah.
And I mean, I always subscribe to Emigre, and I don't know, somehow we've lost touch over quite a few years, but yeah,
Mm. You
I've
know,
never worked with them. They published something of mine, and
mm.
I always subscribe, but no, I never. I mean, that's the same thing. Like that was their thing, you know.
But I love what you said about you and they accepting the direction the technology was going. It's like you were Netflix and the naysayers were Blockbuster Video. So, I think history has borne you out there. Okay, last question. This is from my great former student, Lily Gildor. Hi, Glenn and April. I wanted to ask if there's any new technology or programs that April is excited about using nowadays or potentially trying in the future. Thank you for the wonderful talk. So any thoughts about new technologies coming down the pike that you want to lay your hands on?
Well, I've been working with a collaborator in the UK, Dale Herrigstad, and we've been working on some AR projects.
Oh, wow, nice.
Glenn, we didn't have a chance. I could have shown you like a little loop that's representative of that. That's pretty sweet, but maybe another time.
AR meaning augmented reality, just to translate in case. Yeah.
So, and again, I have to work with, I don't know if one of my young guys, David Pentland, is here, but or Hector Torres or any of these guys that work with me. But I don't know, they know all these programs in ways like Unity, and I don't know, there are all these different things that are really a foreign language to me, but it is going on, and I'm still designing in an augmented reality space, and we're using a couple of my posters which have so much layered kind of information that it lends itself to doing AR. So you can walk through typographic messages and images. And so there's a couple of those going on. We're working hard on these, and we have been for a few years. Now we're just looking for, an outlet, but we're assembling a body of samples of what you could do. And then hopefully we can find a venue to have
Hmm.
a project. Maybe you know one, Glenn.
Well, indeed, we'll talk. Well, April, it doesn't surprise me in the least that you're still on the cutting edge. And I love the idea that you're
No,
leaping.
I'm over the edge, Glenn.
Yeah, there is no edge. Last comment from Donatella Kuzma says, could we do this every morning? Although I think it has been a little early for you. So thank you so much for getting
Yeah,
West
thank you,
Coaster.
everybody. Hey, can I get a list of participants? I'd like to,
We'll
see
send that
them.
to you, and all the commentary in the chat, we'll get that
Oh,
to you.
you will? Oh, you're
Yep,
swell. All
absolutely.
right. Talk
Okay, thanks
soon.
everyone.
Bye.
Hey,
Bye.
just one announcement. On Friday, Stephen, who I just mentioned, will be back on the program with Georgiana Stout from 2x4 graphic design firm. So please come by for that and do listen. And I'll be back actually in a week's time with Samuel Ross, the great young fashion and everything else designer out of London. So come on back. April, thank you so much. This has been absolutely brilliant, intellectually intense, fun,
Thank you.
visually mind-blowing, and everything else you always are. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Okay.
you. You are too, Glenn.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.